Johnny Depp didn't disappear. He didn't retire. He didn't fade away quietly. Yet when he stepped back into public view, many people barely recognized him. After years of lawsuits, silence, and professional exile, Johnny Depp re-emerged looking thinner, older, calmer, and deeply changed. This is not a story about vanity or reinvention. It's about survival, damage, and the cost of staying alive when the world decides you're finished. Before the fall, the cracks were already there. Long before Johnny Depp became a global symbol of rebellion and eccentric charm, instability shaped his life in quiet, damaging ways. Born in Owensboro, Kentucky, he grew up in a household defined by constant movement and emotional unpredictability. His family relocated dozens of times before he reached his mid-teens, leaving him without roots, routines, or any sense of permanence. By the time they settled in Miramar, Florida, the damage had already taken hold. Depp later described a childhood ruled by fear, tension, and sudden outbursts, particularly from his mother, whose volatile temper forced him to stay alert at all times. His father, gentle but withdrawn, offered little protection. Home was not a place of rest. It was something to endure. Music became his escape. When he received a guitar as a young teenager, it gave him something solid to hold on to, something that belonged only to him. By the time most kids were thinking about school dances, Depp was already smoking, drinking, and using drugs, numbing himself against loneliness and anxiety. School offered no refuge either. He felt alienated, bullied, and increasingly disconnected from the world around him. When his parents divorced, the fragile structure of his life collapsed completely. At 16, he dropped out of high school, convinced that chasing music was the only way forward. There was no safety net, no backup plan, just desperation and hope tangled together. That desperation followed him to Los Angeles. His band struggled, sleeping on floors, scraping together money through odd jobs, living on the edge of failure. Music didn't save him. Acting did, almost by accident. Introduced to Nicolas Cage through his first wife, Depp landed an audition that would change his life, not because he believed in acting, but because it paid more than anything he'd ever known. From the outside, success arrived quickly. From the inside, the same patterns remained: insecurity, self-doubt, and a deep resistance to being controlled. When television fame arrived through 21 Jump Street, it felt less like a breakthrough and more like a trap. Depp became a product overnight, marketed, photographed, consumed. The attention was relentless, the schedule brutal, and the expectations suffocating. He resented the image being built around him, felt disconnected from the character the world thought he was. Even as his face covered magazines and posters, he was unraveling internally. He later admitted he felt like a puppet, selling an image that didn't belong to him. Escaping the cage, creating a new identity. Walking away from the image that made him famous was not a calculated career move for Johnny Depp. It was an act of desperation. After years trapped inside the glossy machinery of television fame, he no longer trusted popularity, and he certainly didn't trust the industry that had packaged him so easily. What he wanted was distance, from expectations, from formulas, from the idea that he owed anyone a version of himself they could recognize. That hunger for escape led him toward filmmakers who operated outside the mainstream, people who valued discomfort and risk over safety. The most important of those relationships began when Tim Burton offered him a role that almost no rising star would accept. Edward Scissorhands was not heroic, charming, or even verbal in the conventional sense. The character was fragile, isolated, and misunderstood, everything Depp already felt inside. He later admitted that Edward felt personal, almost autobiographical, as if Burton had somehow written the role specifically for him. The performance demanded restraint rather than charisma, silence rather than seduction. Critics noticed immediately. For the first time, audiences were forced to see Depp not as a heartthrob, but as a serious actor capable of emotional depth. Instead of returning to safer projects, Depp leaned further into uncertainty. He chose roles that confused audiences and unsettled studios. He played misfits, outsiders, damaged men drifting on the edge of society. Each film seemed to push him further away from commercial logic and closer to obsession. He immersed himself completely, studying mannerisms, voices, and psychology until the lines between himself and his characters began to blur. On set, he earned a reputation for intensity and unpredictability. Off-set, he was already numbing himself with substances that helped quiet the noise in his head. This period brought critical respect, but it also normalized excess. As praise grew, so did his tolerance for chaos. Directors admired his commitment. Studios overlooked his habits as long as the performances delivered. Depp learned a dangerous lesson early on, that brilliance could excuse self-destruction. Alcohol, pills, and long nights became part of the routine, not an exception. What looked like artistic freedom from the outside was slowly becoming dependency. Global fame, private collapse. Global superstardom didn't arrive gradually for Johnny Depp. It hit with overwhelming force. When he stepped into the role of Captain Jack Sparrow, the character exploded far beyond the film itself and turned into a cultural phenomenon. What made the performance unforgettable was its refusal to obey logic. Sparrow was unstable, slurred, untrustworthy, and oddly brilliant, a man constantly on the verge of collapse who survived through instinct and luck. Audiences embraced him instantly. Studios panicked at first, then rushed to build an empire around him. Depp went from respected character actor to one of the highest-paid performers in the world almost overnight. The money was staggering. The expectations were worse. With each sequel, the scale grew larger, the schedules longer, and the pressure heavier. What had once been a risky creative choice became a machine that demanded consistency, availability, and obedience. Depp's life off-screen began to mirror the excess of the franchise itself. Lavish spending, constant travel, and a widening circle of enablers insulated him from consequences. Substance use, once hidden, became normalized within his environment. Being late, forgetting lines, disappearing between takes, these behaviors were tolerated because the brand was still profitable. At the same time, his personal life was fracturing. After years of relative stability with Vanessa Paradis and their children, the relationship quietly ended. The separation marked the loss of the one period in his adult life that had offered calm and routine. What followed was not healing, but acceleration. He moved quickly into another relationship, one fueled by intensity rather than balance. Friends would later describe this period as chaotic, volatile, and emotionally exhausting. Professionally, the cracks were starting to show. Studios grew nervous, directors complained privately, insurance companies raised concerns. Depp was still being cast, but trust was thinning. When he took on darker roles that demanded discipline, the same issues surfaced. Substance dependence, once seen as part of the artist's mystique, became a liability. Yet no one stepped in forcefully. The system that had elevated him had no incentive to slow him down. A marriage that turned into a public trial. When Johnny Depp married Amber Heard, the relationship was already carrying pressure from every direction. He was coming off the end of a long partnership that had given him privacy and emotional distance from Hollywood. She was younger, ambitious, and moving quickly inside an industry that thrived on visibility. From the beginning, their connection was intense rather than stable. Friends later described it as passionate but volatile, marked by sharp emotional swings and frequent conflict. Depp himself would later say that the relationship moved too fast, before either of them truly understood what they were stepping into. The marriage unraveled almost immediately. Within a short period, private arguments became legal documents, and personal accusations became public records. When Heard filed for divorce and requested a restraining order, the story detonated across media outlets worldwide. Photographs, statements, and anonymous leaks flooded the press. Depp denied the accusations, but denial carried little weight once the narrative took hold. In the climate of that moment, distance and silence were interpreted as guilt. Studios reacted quickly, not out of legal judgment, but fear. Projects disappeared. Long-standing partnerships were severed without warning. Depp later said he learned he had been removed from major franchises by reading the news, not through conversations. The situation escalated further when Heard published an opinion piece describing herself as a public figure who had survived abuse. Though Depp was not named, the implication was unmistakable. He believed the article destroyed what remained of his reputation and career. What followed was a legal decision that few expected. Instead of retreating, Depp chose confrontation. He filed a defamation lawsuit, knowing it would expose every corner of his private life. The choice came with enormous risk. Court cases do not preserve dignity, they strip it away. The trial turned into something larger than either person involved. Audio recordings, text messages, and testimony revealed a relationship built on mutual dysfunction, substance abuse, and emotional warfare. Neither side emerged unscathed. For Depp, the cost was brutal. Years of addiction, rage, and self-loathing were dissected in real time. His past became ammunition. Every flaw was magnified. Even supporters admitted that the picture painted was not flattering. The silence, the damage, and the change no one expected. After the courtroom emptied and the cameras moved on, Johnny Depp did not rush back into the spotlight. There were no victory tours, no loud declarations, no attempt to reclaim the version of fame he once had. Instead, there was silence. For long stretches, he stayed out of public view, appearing only briefly and often unexpectedly. When he did surface, people noticed something unsettling. He looked smaller, frailer. The man who once filled rooms with swagger now seemed withdrawn, as if carrying weight no one else could see. The years of stress, addiction, and public humiliation had taken a visible toll on his body. During this period, Depp lost a dramatic amount of weight. Insiders described months where he barely appeared, fueling speculation about his health and mental state. Some worried the transformation was a sign of collapse rather than recovery. Others whispered that something drastic had happened behind the scenes, something that forced him to confront the consequences of how he had been living. Depp himself would later hint at this when he said that many people had vanished from his life once the accusations surfaced, leaving him alone to face the truth of who remained. This isolation became a turning point. Away from the machinery of Hollywood, he began restructuring his daily life in ways he never had before. Substance use, once woven into his identity, was no longer sustainable. He focused on controlled routines, simpler living, and the kind of discipline that had always terrified him. He later described this period as necessary, even life-saving. Not a reinvention, but a reckoning. He wasn't trying to become someone new. He was trying to survive being himself. By the time he reappeared publicly, the change was undeniable. The weight loss was extreme. His posture was different, his expressions calmer, almost guarded. He no longer projected defiance or bitterness. Instead, there was restraint, a quiet distance from the chaos that had once defined him. When asked about a comeback, Depp rejected the word entirely. He said he hadn't gone anywhere. People had simply stopped calling. The implication was clear. The exile had never been self-imposed. A return that feels different this time. When Johnny Depp finally stepped back into a major Hollywood production, it didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt cautious, deliberate, almost restrained. His role in the upcoming thriller Day Drinker marked his first true return to mainstream American cinema since the legal battle that consumed years of his life. Directed by Mark Webb, the project paired Depp once again with Penelope Cruz, a longtime collaborator who had stood beside him in several films across different stages of his career. This time, however, the context was entirely different. There was no franchise safety net, no guaranteed box office dominance, and no illusion that things could simply return to how they were. What shocked the public wasn't just the announcement of the film, but Depp's appearance. With silver hair, a full gray beard, and striking blue contact lenses, he looked almost unrecognizable. The familiar swagger was gone, replaced by something quieter and more controlled. Fans quickly labeled it his Silver Fox era, but beneath the surface glamour was something more unsettling. This wasn't a cosmetic update or a playful reinvention. It looked like the face of someone who had been through prolonged stress, isolation, and self-examination. Even his smile told a story. After years of visible dental decay that symbolized neglect and excess, his newly restored teeth became an unexpected focal point. For many, it signaled not vanity, but care, evidence that he was finally tending to himself in ways he once ignored. Depp addressed the idea of a comeback with visible discomfort. At a press conference, he said he never went anywhere, that people simply stopped calling out of fear. It wasn't bitterness in his voice, but clarity. He seemed uninterested in revenge or validation. Instead, he spoke about resilience and about learning who remained when everything else fell away. This version of Johnny Depp isn't chasing dominance or relevance. He isn't trying to erase the past or demand forgiveness. He's choosing projects slowly, surrounding himself with fewer people, and keeping his distance from the chaos that once consumed him. Johnny Depp is back, but not as the man the world remembers. Do you see this transformation as a fresh start, or as the visible cost of everything he's endured? Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories behind Hollywood's most complicated lives.